My name is Ashley Green, and this is my 321 assignment. I chose to watch episode 2, which was about the economy of love, and it was all geared towards the family. So, there were 3 different pieces of information that I learned for the first time and that I thought was very interesting. And the first thing that I learned was whenever he was talking about the statistical differences between Christian marriages or Christian families and non Christian families, people who are agnostic, atheists, the secular realm. The first statistic that he pointed out was that 32% of Christian marriages end in divorce. At first, I thought that was high, anyways, but then he talked about how those who are agnostic or those who are atheist, their marriages end 33% of the time end in divorce. And I was shocked by how close those two were, that it was only by 1%. You would think that in the Bible, we talk about how marriage is a great representation of Jesus and how the church is Christ's bride. So you would think that we would put more emphasis, more focus on marriage, and that our levels of divorce rate would be lower. So I was very shocked to see that it was only a 1% difference. But then he also went on to talk about the statistics for sex before marriage. And he said that 80% of single Christians had had sex before marriage, while 88% of the secular world agreed to having sex before marriage. So that was only a difference of 8%, which I also, again, I thought was staggering. I never realized that it was that much, nor that it would be that close. So I thought those 2 pieces of information were interesting, but they also made me want to do something. It made me want to search out what the problem is and what we can do to better educate people and to explain the importance of marriage and putting marriage first. The other piece of information that I learned is that in the video they talked about how family works as our foundation, and how if we have a strong family foundation, then that will give us a good picture of a strong society. And I thought about that, and I just thought how true that is, that whenever we have a strong family, then we will continue to raise up stronger generations when they can have a family, or they can see their parents, they can see that marriage, they can see that strong foundation. We're being a great representation for the next generation. And when we see that in our parents' lives and our families' lives, and then when we turn around and we show that with our generations after us, that we are producing a major change and that will affect the society as a whole. So I thought it was very interesting that he talked about how important marriage was as a foundational piece for a functioning society. Because even now we see, we've just seen how marriages, as they fall apart, as children are a part of broken families, we see how that shapes their choices and their decisions and how society becomes. And so we can watch as our society becomes more healthy if we would put more emphasis on marriage and family and making that stronger and making it healthy. The third thing that I learned is whenever they were talking about how we are created in God's image, a lot of those things, I already knew. I knew that we have creativity just like God has creativity. We have free will just like God has free will. But something I had never thought about before, they talked about how God, in his nature, he desires to pour out love, and how we also have that in our nature, that we, when we were created and as we grow, we have the desire to pour out love. We have the desire to show love to our spouse, to our family, to our children, and that's just in us. That's part of our nature. And I thought that was very interesting to think about that. And then there were also 2 things that I was already aware of, but I don't always think about. And the first thing, and one of the things that I think is the most important, is when they were interviewing the family, they talked about how important it is to be intentional with everything that you do. And I think as Christians, we all know that we need to be intentional. We all know that in order to make a difference, it starts in a small way. It starts by making one intentional step at a time. It doesn't have to be a big, overwhelming task, but if we start a piece at a time, then it becomes easier. And we all know that, but it's not something that we all do. It's not always our main focus. And so being able to hear that and think about it, it was just one of those things that made me think about it and want to say, you know what, I can be more intentional. And I think that's something, me specifically, but I think all of us as Christians, if we can focus on being more intentional with our actions, I think that we can watch as our generation shifts, as we begin to change and we begin to mold a healthier generation and a healthier society. Because as we're more intentional with our actions, we'll begin to see things change and a spark will be ignited with the people around us. So that was something that I knew, but something that I think my focus needs to be more on. The second thing that I learned is the power that we have to affect our generations and future generations. In the video, the married couple talked about being intentional and how through that their children were learning to be intentional. And because of that, they were making different decisions. And then later, whenever they get married and they have kids, their children will see them being intentional, and that will affect them. And that can continue on for generation and generation to their great great grandchildren. And generations can be changed all because of strong decisions, intentional decisions that were made. And I think often we forget about the generation to come. I think a lot of times we are focused in our world and what we're doing, that we forget to think about the generation that's coming after us. Whether we have kids or not, we all have someone in our life that we can influence, and that will be a part of the next generation, whether it be our kids, our nieces, our nephews, our cousins, someone in our life that can look up to us, that they can see something in us, and that can spark them for their next generation. And so I think that's something that we have to be mindful of, is that we have the power to affect our generation as well as all the ones to come. And I think a lot of times we lose sight of that, and we just focus on the here and now, forgetting that we can leave a legacy, that we can leave an impact for all the generations to come. The question that I chose to answer is, how is the entire church like a family? And there's multiple reasons for that, but one of them is because of all of the relationships within a church. We all work together to impact future generations. Just like I talked about with a family, we can impact generations. Well, so does the church. We can all work together, and we have multiple generations in our church, and there are constantly people that can be ministered to, that can be mentored, that can look up to us, or that we can look up to, that can be influences in our lives and in the lives of people around us, just like you have in a family. You have those different roles. And we can also be intentional with our church family, just like we can with our immediate family. Also talked about how marriage is the foundation for society. Church can be the same way, because we can work together. If our church can help strengthen each other, if we can all be stronger, then we can watch as our society transforms, and we can watch as that becomes stronger, because we can be reflected in the people around us. But almost even more so, because it can affect even more people, and we can reach out to our society in a more direct way.